Good afternoon, everyone. Super to be here in Naples, South Florida, where you have seen quite a substantial economic growth, real estate growth, perhaps maybe not in the past couple of years, but you did have just people coming in needing a place to live, a wonderful place, as you know, but we have found some difficulties, at least in terms of business opportunity, for the past two and a half years. In fact, I must admit that I have been wrong in terms of housing market revival this year. I thought that we would see a meaningful increase in home sales this year, but it has not. And the principal reason is that I had assumed that the mortgage rate would be falling from spring of this year, but it refuses to budge. It went up and just simply refused to go down. And the question is, when will the mortgage rate begins to go down, when we will really begin to resuscitate some of the transaction activity? Prices, as you know, have maybe come down a bit, but anyone who purchased their property 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they are saying, whoa, I am sitting on a super high housing wealth situation. So 1 or 2 years of some stagnation in prices or even some price decline in certain neighborhood for long-time residents is not a concern. For recent buyers, maybe they feel, am I underwater situation? So there are those concerns as well. So should we view the market condition? Well, let me first start with why I was off in my forecast. So this is the Federal Reserve, not myself, Federal Reserve, who controls the monetary policy, how they were viewing the economy back in 2024. That would be the middle column. So in 2024, they said the economy is pretty good. GDP, which is economic activity, expected to rise 2.1% this year in 2020, and the inflation to be pretty much controlled at 2.5%. But early this year, the Federal Reserve, or Jay Powell, if you know specifically, they changed the forecast. They changed the forecast to say, look, I don't think economy is strong anymore. I think the economy will slow down to only 1.7% growth. So sluggish economic activity, and inflation a little bit higher. And they gave the reasoning as to why this would be the case. Tariffs. Federal Reserve, Jay Powell is saying, we don't like tariffs. Tariff will make the economy worse. That is why the Federal Reserve is saying, well, given this condition, we cannot lower the interest rate, especially with higher inflationary projections in the forecast. Naturally, President Trump, where he has said the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. And to say that tariff is causing a bad economic outlook, well, President Trump, he will not hold back his words. Therefore, calling Jay Powell, you are idiot, you need to go, and all the other languages that is out there. So the question is, Federal Reserve has been on pause. That's why mortgage rate refused to go down. But when will it change? First, let's look at the monetary policy. So this is from year 2000 onwards. So sometimes interest rates are high. This is not the mortgage rate. This is the Federal Reserve policy rate, short-term interest rate, which indirectly influences mortgage rates. So sometimes it's low, sometimes it's high. We know that it goes through business cycles. But look at the last rate increase. Those are one of the most aggressive high rate of increase in such a short span of time. That is why the mortgage rate went from 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, up to 8%. Now, it has settled down at 7% recently, but still very, very high level conditions. Federal Reserve did cut interest rate late last year, in September of last year, but it did not do anything to the mortgage rate because mortgage rate wants to see more deeper cut expectation before mortgage rate would go down. So the impact of this is the following. The monthly payment to buy a typical home in America. Naples is not typical. You are an expensive market, but still the trend line will be very, very similar. The trend line is essentially to say that the monthly payment to buy a typical home has doubled from what it was pre-COVID to what it is now because of high interest rate environment. Now, during lunch, President Terry Lin explained to me that in this area, about 50%, 60% of transactions are all cash. People don't use mortgages. I remember the similar figure out in Aspen, Colorado, when I was speaking with Aspen realtors out there. But even though you are all cash, interesting part is home buying activity reflects as if people in Naples, people in Aspen care about mortgage rates. So when the mortgage rate goes down, you have much more transactions. When the mortgage rate rises, you have stalling in transactions. So even though you are in all cash transaction, the behavior is as if the mortgage rate really matters in the local market. That's what we find historically. And currently, even though you are all cash transaction or more than half of the transactions been cash, you have sluggish home sales. Why? Because mortgage rates are high. So this condition has really impacted and held back some of the transaction potential because of the high interest rate environment. And as of early August, what I am finding is that the 30-year fixed rate mortgage at about 6.6%, and thank goodness that Veterans of America who put in their service, they're getting a little lower interest rate at 6.2%. And the reasoning for that lower interest rate for the veterans is that there is a government guarantee. Now, for conforming mortgages, it's an implied government guarantee, meaning that people take out a mortgage, whether it's issued by Wells Fargo, Bank of America, or local mortgage lender, but most of those mortgages get sold over to Fannie and Freddie, and because of that, you have that blue line at the front. The line at the end, jumbo mortgages, no government guarantee, is high interest rate. There was some discussion at the beginning of the Trump administration whether or not Fannie and Freddie will face the DOGE cuts to say we don't need Fannie and Freddie anymore. Well, President Trump, as you know, he's a real estate guy. So he said, I want to see lower interest rate. And when he see this chart, he is saying, no way I'm going to make the Fannie and Freddie like the jumbo mortgage rate. We don't want higher interest rate. We need lower interest rate. And consequently, any reform of Fannie and Freddie, maybe there's a lot of reform that is required. Maybe they have excessive employees, so try to cut out the fats from it. But we're not going to cut out the muscle. We're not going to cut out the implied government guarantee. So that's something that NAR has advocated all through, and consequently, any reform of Fannie and Freddie, there will be a government guarantee to that. Just to illustrate that some of you are very active in committee meetings, some of you participate in some advocacy efforts, you go to Florida Association meeting, you come to NAR, and we push the issue that the realtors are saying, look, this is important. We need to make sure Fannie and Freddie have government guarantee, and President Trump has said, yeah, there will be government guarantee on Fannie and Freddie, whatever reform it takes place. So when will the Federal Reserve cut interest rate, providing relief to the mortgage rate and for home buyers? This is consumer price inflation. Not home prices, but consumer prices on everything. Grocery bill, gas station, pharmaceutical drug, college tuition, all combined. So as you can see in the middle of the graph, that was 3 summers ago. 3 summers ago, you went to the grocery store and you came back angry. What the heck happened? They're stealing my money. Everything was very expensive. Well, as you can see, today inflation is much, much calmer, but it's not really at that red line. Red line is sort of implied preferred inflation rate that the Federal Reserve wants to see at 2%. We're busy with our lives. We have to take care of our kid who's going to the soccer game. We have to do the open houses. We're very busy. 2%, 2.7%, why argue over decimal point? It's time to cut interest rate. Some people say, Dad, but the Federal Reserve is saying, no, we need to really see the inflation rate at 2.0% before really making the move, or they are convinced that inflation rate will be coming down. And they are saying, the Federal Reserve is saying, tariff will not help this. We understand that immediately you put tariff on a Chinese product, all the stuff that we buy, clothes, toys, it's going to be a little more expensive. So Federal Reserve, in anticipation of potentially higher inflationary pressure, is saying, nope, we're not going to cut interest rate. We're going to be on the pause. But one thing that bothers me about the Federal Reserve, they're only talking about tariffs. Yes, tariff will be inflationary, but there's something else going on. For example, first bullet point, tariffs. Second bullet point, shelter costs. The big weight of the consumer price inflation is really about rents and housing costs. And the housing cost is no longer inflationary, it's disinflationary. So maybe they should begin to mention about cooling down in the home prices, cooling down in the rent condition. So something they don't mention. What about deregulation? President Trump does not like all this red tape. Remove the red tape. To the degree that it lowers the business operating costs, maybe some of the lower business operating costs can be passed on to the consumers in terms of lower consumer prices. But it's invisible, less tangible. It takes time. But it's clearly disinflationary. Oil prices back to pre-COVID, realtors drive more than ordinary Americans, so certainly benefits you. But consider the toy that is being sent from China. 18-wheelers have to deliver that. Well, to deliver it through the 18-wheeler trucks is now cheaper than before. That's disinflationary compared to before. And also maybe President Trump, even though he said tariff is a beautiful word, maybe it's not really the purpose of tariffs, but the fairness. Why come Chinese have tariff on our products? Why come Japan has tariff on our products? Why come Europe has tariff on our products? Let's make it fair. So you lower your tariff, we will lower ours. So it is more of a business deal to say that, no, I'm not interested in raising tariff. We just want you to lower your tariff so we can lower our tariffs. So if it's a reciprocal tariff to lower it, then that could be disinflationary. If somehow the economy weakens, as the Federal Reserve believes, that's going to be disinflationary. Now, one new sort of negativity that was introduced to the market is somehow the dollar is appearing to be weakening somewhat. But this dollar weakening is coming from super, super strong dollar conditions. So it used to be super strong. Now I would say still strong, but you cannot use the adjective very strong. But to the degree that dollar is weakening, that will be somewhat inflationary. Maybe this region is important. After all, we are here in the high technology, medical technology building here. But the pharmaceutical drug, most of the innovation in pharmaceutical drug is done in America because Americans are innovative. But it takes millions of dollars to come up with a new pharmaceutical chemical thing to help us relieve some pain and other things. But to produce that pill, extra pill part, it is very minimal cost. Maybe it only takes 50 cents to produce one extra pill. But the pharmaceutical companies need to recover their millions of dollars in investment. So they charge high fee in order to recover those investment costs. But then they said, is there any additional market? They said, well, Canadians can buy these pharmaceutical drugs, or Europeans can buy. So pharmaceutical drug companies have been charging high for Americans, but low for the Canadians. And President Trump said, no more. Whatever you are charging the Canadians will be the same price that Americans will be paying. So whether that is an executive order, whether it requires a legislation from Congress, I'm not sure, but President Trump is saying whatever the Canadians are paying, that's what the Americans are paying. Now, some economists have done some analysis of potential scenario of it, and they think that most likely it's more like Canadians will be beginning to pay a little higher compared to what they have been paying. But the idea is to say, Canadians, no more free lunch. They've been getting free lunch on national defense, just relying on American national defense, and they've been getting free lunch on pharmaceutical drugs, but no more of that case. But to the degree that pharmaceutical drug prices can come down, well, that's going to be disinflationary. So the point here is, Federal Reserve only talks about tariffs. But if they were to widen their horizon, maybe there's some disinflationary pressure that is on the horizon so that inflation will not be a problem and the Federal Reserve can cut interest rate from it. So just to illustrate some of this point, this is the shelter cost, what the rent trends are. So a few years ago, one could strongly raise rents. But today, you can no longer raise the rent as strong as before. You are not necessarily cutting rents, but you are not able to raise the rent by 8% from 1 year before. So it's decelerating. And the prospect of some Federal Reserve rate cut is go to the bettings market. People actually not only talk, but put their money into what the Federal Reserve will be doing. So according to the predictions model, people are actually making a bet. The blue bar shows the most recent, what people expect. So 2 rate cuts this year is probably the most likely the case, but there are some people who think there could be even 3 rate cuts, or people who still believe that there could be a little less. Orange line was 1 month ago. So notice the little shift. There's more likely belief for people betting money today that there will be about 2 rate cuts this year, sometime maybe in September, and then another one after that. Let me, in the meantime, turn to the labor market. Labor market is showing solid conditions. It begins from early 2020, before the arrival of that ugly COVID virus. So 150 million Americans were working and receiving paycheck. Then COVID hit, lockdown, hotel industry, total collapse. Restaurant, barely surviving. Florida, they said, no, we cannot keep people locked up. We need to release people. So Florida was one of the first states to say, look, you can go out, go to the restaurant, do your things. And as the economy steadily reopened, more job creation, more job creation, more job creation. Pennsylvania, realtors were extremely frustrated. They saw what was happening in Florida. They saw what was happening in Georgia. They said, please let us do open houses. We will open the window. We will bring people in one by one. But the governor said, nope, no, that's too dangerous. We're not going to allow you that. So, Pennsylvania was one of the states to, I think, have a lockdown for one of the longest period condition. But as more states reopen their economy, more job creation, such that now we have 7.3 million more people working now compared to before. If we look at the month-to-month change, so it's the same data, but showing it differently. How many job addition each month? So it's been positive. I think many of you have heard that the prior 2 months, the figures are much lower. And consequently, President Trump fired the top person of that agency. Now, to put it in perspective, I remember one of the economists from Venezuela where they released some consumer price inflation for Venezuela. Well, he did not get fired, he got arrested. Thank goodness that I'm a US citizen, but I was born in South Korea. But I can understand what North Koreans, they don't want to produce statistics, they're going to get shot. But let's see who Trump appoints. He says close to appointing the new commissioner of that data statistical agency. But the 2 months was revised. But even with the revision, again, go back to this chart. Consistent, let me go back to the chart. Consistent job addition such that we have 7.3 million more jobs. Also, the wage growth, which is shown in the green line, is above the consumer price inflation line of blue. So again, 3 summers ago, we had high inflation. All your wage growth was eaten up by high prices. People's standard of living was falling. But as you can see, the green line is above the blue line, and therefore people's standard of living marginally is improving among those people who are receiving steady paychecks. Realtors, you are on commission income, so your income fluctuates wildly, but among people who are receiving W-2 statement paychecks, the green line being a little better. Was that 3 months ago with the stock market crash, when President Trump came out with all this tariff rule that came out and stock market crash? At that time, they asked the Treasury Secretary, what do you think about this stock market crash? He's a hedge fund guy, he's a very wealthy person. And his response at the time when the stock market was crashing is, I'm not looking at the stock market. What I'm looking at is this graph. I want the middle class Americans' standard of living to be rising, green line to be above the blue line. That was what he was saying at the time when the stock market was crashing. Well, you look up the stock market today, is all-time high, pretty much at all-time high. So you have combination of stock market roaring back, along with the fact that American standard of living is rising in terms of the wage growth outpacing people's income. Now let me give you a very good graph for you. This is a state-by-state comparison. Green is good and Florida is green. So in Florida, people in the back may not be able to read the figure. It is showing 11.5%. 11.5% more job now compared to pre-COVID. I am comparing with pre-COVID condition when the employment was very good. Every state's employment was very good pre-COVID. Florida has 11.5% more job. Green colors are superstars, top of the top tier states. Dark blue, in essence, would be above national average, while the light blue would be sluggish. They're positive, but more at a slower pace of job growth. So keep in mind, when you are currently having large inventory, when will it get soaked up? You have many more people coming into the state that have job, but one limiting factor is high mortgage rates. So what would happen if the mortgage rate goes down, given you are adding so many jobs to the area? So Florida, one of the top performers, and if you're looking at, so this will be a 5-year graph, but if you're looking at just past 12-month graph, it will look like the following. So Florida adding 1.4% more job in the past 12 months, still very, very positive situation. South Carolina is really showing good numbers, but if you talk with the realtors in South Carolina, they will say they're getting many clients who believe Florida has become too expensive, and therefore they're beginning to look at South Carolina market conditions. So this would be the Naples area payroll employment. So people receiving paycheck, not commission income, but receiving paycheck. Back in 1990, how many of you were here in Naples or say in Florida? Florida in 1990s by show of hands. And rough estimate, I don't have the artificial intelligence in my head, that's about 15% of you. Less than 20% of you were here in 1990. But back in 1990, it was a small town, only 50,000 people working. But today, you have 175,000, and you wonder what the projection will be, say, 25 years from now. And if you think this line will continue upwards, just consider, again, job creation, great location, the ocean, surrounding ocean. What are the real estate value? Is it high, or will it go even higher over the next 25 years? So right now, you are seeing little temporary declines. Maybe the word, that adjective is proper, temporary decline, not a permanent decline. Is it a second chance opportunity for people who can qualify to get into the market, better selection, better negotiating power, but also at the same time, if you have a seller at the moment, maybe they need to be very realistic to the market condition. But let me look at the residential market. Next speaker, Brad O'Connor, who studied the Florida market, he will give you very detailed information about the Florida market condition, Naples market condition, but I want to give you more national scope because interest rate impacts many, many things. So because of high interest rate of the past 2 years, home sales in the past 2 years have been only at 75% of pre-COVID. First bar is 2019, pre-COVID condition. And we are below pre-COVID condition, even with more jobs, 7 million more jobs in the country. So even with more potential housing demand, it is still just a potential. It's not actual demand because of high interest rates. But when the interest rate goes down, just consider what would happen. Let me go to 2025. The year is not finished. We're only halfway through. But if you look at the monthly data, what I am finding is no recovery. So I'm completely off here. I thought we would see some meaningful recovery in 2025, but it did not happen. But I was also anticipating for a little lower mortgage rate, and that did not happen as well. So we are beginning to see, or I should say that we are still stuck in terms of low sales activity. And the inventory in the meantime is beginning to show increase. If you remember back in 2008, 2009, great recession, foreclosures everywhere. I remember one newspaper, Miami Herald, at that time, something like 40 years of inventory in Miami, to imply that it may take 40 years to normalize the situation. Of course, it did not take 40 years. After a few years, it quickly came back in Miami. But currently, people are saying, well, we are in that locked-in situation. Homeowners have 3% mortgage rate, they will never give it up. What do you know? We are seeing increased inventory, because we are seeing increased inventory not only from Florida-specific issue, like property insurance or older condominium leading the reserve fund, but nationwide we are seeing increase in inventory because people have to move on with their life. They have an additional child, they need a larger size home. People turn 65, they want to downsize or move away from where they are. So life-changing events constantly occurring, so we are beginning to see more inventory. I think Brad will mention that in Florida, pretty much you are back up to pre-COVID, but nationwide, we are not yet back up to pre-COVID condition. In the meantime, because of more inventory, home price appreciation is stagnating nationwide. Here, down a bit, but nationwide, it is still positive, but barely positive, which means roughly, say, 40%, 50% of the country may be seeing slight decline in home prices. Look at the middle of the graph, the frenzy activity. That's the early years of the COVID, low interest rate environment, frenzy activity really pushing up the prices. So if we look at the actual home price, again, nationwide condition, we are at a record high. So I know the media is constantly mentioning housing market in a slump, housing market in the dumps, housing market stagnating, all the bad word, but your past clients are pretty much smiling and they're all happy. They're not in a foreclosure situation, they have built wealth. Only that your business activity is sluggish. So your business activity is sluggish, title insurance business activity is sluggish, mortgage originator a little sluggish, or even the moving trucks, the business activity is sluggish, but your past clients are all smiling and they're doing well because of record high home prices. And in fact, if we look at the 5-year pre-COVID to recent, what you are finding is Florida, again green, one of the top performer for price appreciation, showing that in the past 5 years, typically 68% price increase for a homeowner. These are substantial gains, 68% price increase. So for long-time homeowner, you lose 5%, it's no big deal. Maybe only the recent home buyer, they're beginning to worry, they're beginning to panic a bit, but for most homeowners, they are in a very comfortable situation. Let me put the graph a little differently also. The blue line shows the total housing valuation in America. Again, record high home prices, we are at a record high real estate valuation. While the red line at the bottom shows the mortgage debt amount. So look how much cushion there is, equity cushion. So if you are anticipating any kind of foreclosure crisis, it's not going to happen given so much equity that is held up in the market. So using these two graphs, put it as a blue minus the red, what you see is that record high net worth situation. Also during our conversation with the President, Terry Lin, there was some talk about some young people saying maybe they don't want to buy real estate, just put the money in the stock market. After all, stock market is at a record high condition. But show this graph to any young people who are hesitant to buy property. But maybe they are waiting to get married or maybe settle down condition. Because this graph, I think, is one of the most powerful for first-time buyers to see, to say that if you want to have wealth in America, data from the Federal Reserve, if you want to be part of the blue, you have to own part of America. If you are renting, whatever the stock market performance, on average, renters are not building wealth over time. But homeowners, they are building wealth over time. You know the reason you pay the mortgages, that's part of the principal write down that you are paying, sort of discipline in savings, but also home price appreciation. You never know when it's going to rise, quickly. So when you catch that, you will have substantial wealth. So homeowners, financially secure, financially successful in America, renters simply spinning their wheels Intuitively, you know, well, you have the data now to support that argument. And also the high record home prices, I would say, is in a stable condition. If you look at this, the blue line shows the mortgage delinquency. People are missing mortgage payment for 3 straight months or longer, while the orange line shows the actual foreclosures. So we are near historically low and nowhere compared to, say, back in 2008 condition. So in other words, some people say, oh, home prices are on shaky ground, maybe it will crash. I'm gonna wait until home prices crash 30% before entering the market. This graph is saying, nope, that's not gonna happen. Maybe 5% decline, maybe 7% decline in some neighborhood, but not a prolonged, long declines. And keep in mind also that cash transaction means people don't have any mortgages. In fact, we look across the country, we have 35 million Americans. More than about 40% of Americans have no mortgages whatsoever, which means there's no foreclosure chance whatsoever. So housing market, home values in a very, very solid ground. Given the time limitation, let me just run quickly on a few more graphs. So this is a little light flashing. This is weekly mortgage application to buy a home. Not refinances, but to buy a home. Now, it does not mean that they're actually buying a home, but at least it's a first step. And also the fact that they apply for a mortgage is saying they are serious buyers. Like they're not like flaky, oh, I want to buy or maybe not buy. The fact that they actually apply for a mortgage is showing seriousness. And that has turned positive, and it's been running about 20% above 1 year ago. So home sales closings have not increased, but mortgage application has increased by 20%, so indicating good conditions. So to wrap it up, let me go to the forecast. So first part is the survey of the renters. Just survey of the renters. Do you prefer buying a home? Overwhelming majority say yes, buying a home is part of my American dream. Maybe not now, or maybe not in a high interest rate environment, but people do believe in the American dream of ownership. And that mortgage rate, as I mentioned, is one hindering factor. But we did a scenario of what would happen if the mortgage rate was to go back down to 6%. So when we did this analysis, looking at the local demographic, local income condition, what we find was that in the Naples region, there will be about additional 5,000 people who would qualify to get a mortgage who cannot qualify today if the mortgage rate was to go down to 6%. Now, not everyone will buy a home. They are just sort of doing their everyday activity, whatever they did yesterday, they're going to continue today. But we also, based on our past analysis, roughly 1,100 people are probably going to respond to those low interest rates and come into the market over the next 12-month, next 18-month period. So again, mortgage rate goes down, expect meaningful revival in your business activity. So overall forecast is right now, home sales, your business condition kind of stuck, but your past clients are doing well. So when you give a call to your past clients, they're not angry. They're probably happy if they have purchased a property with you 3 years or longer condition, given the price increases. But if the mortgage rate was to somehow come down, expect some revival coming along. And also the long term meaning that Naples used to be a small town, now it's on the map. It's going to go even bigger. You have so much land as you go towards the east. You wonder how much more development there will be in the upcoming years part. So huge long-term optimism in the local area. So thank you very much for coming, and thanks for listening.